escaped. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank my colleagues, two wonderful colleagues, Senators Shaheen and Cardin, for joining me here today. Now, as everyone knows, President Trump put down his phone for an hour to come to the Senate Republican luncheon to talk tax reform. Unfortunately, what the President says about tax reform has been correctly characterized by Senator Corker as untruths. And Corker was being kind. Let's just review a few of what the President says. It's just totally divorced. What the President says and what the Republican plan does are polar opposites. So, for instance, the President said this is not a plan for the rich. Blatantly untrue. Untruth number one, that this plan is not a plan for the rich. It repeals the estate tax, which benefits the 11,000 wealthiest estates in the country. Each one has to be more than $5 million. It lowers the top rate. Untruth number two, allowing hedge fund owners and big law firms to take advantage. Three, it provides a pass-through so very wealthy people can pay a lower rate than average Americans. Untruth after, so it is totally untrue, shall we say, that this is not a plan for the rich, which the President has stated. Then he says, at the heart of our plan is a tax cut for everyday working Americans. Untruth number two. Just wrong. Tax Policy Center, a third of middle-class families would pay more, and very few get much of a break. When they talk about getting rid of state and local deductibility, when they talk about limiting 401ks, when they talk about limiting the mortgage deduction, those are all aimed at making the middle class pay more so the rich can get a bigger tax break. That's not what America needs, that's not what America wants, and that is not what's in the plans put together by our Republican leadership in the House and Senate. That's an untruth. And then the President claims this will not increase, this will lower the deficit. Untruth number three. Absurd. No one believes that this will lower the deficit, and the Washington Post fact checker called this claim a fantasy. No one believes it. So it's untruth after untruth after untruth, as Bob Corker put it, when the President talks about the Republican tax plan. Untruth one, it's aimed at helping the middle class. Untruth two, it's not a plan for the rich. Untruth three, it lowers the deficit. This plan is a disaster for America. It's no wonder our Republican colleagues want to rush it through in the dark of night, because the more it's exposed to sunlight, the more rotten it smells, and the American people will know that. Senator Cardin.
Well, thank you, Senator Schumer. The more we're learning about the tax proposal that the Republicans will be unveiling next week, the more we have concern that this is certainly not in the interests of the American people. And Senator Schumer talked about the fact, one thing is clear, it will blow a hole in the deficit. They're acknowledging it'll blow a hole in the deficit when they allow a $1 trillion hole to be created on the tax proposal. But in addition, we know that there's a lot of gaps in even reaching a $1.5 trillion deficit. Secondly, we know that it will benefit higher income families. The wealthiest are the ones that are going to get the big tax cuts. Senator Schumer mentioned this state tax repeal. He mentioned the issues concerning the high alternative minimum tax, which will benefit wealthy families. That's all clear. But one thing is also clear to me, and that is middle-income families are going to be asked to pay more. They're not going to get a tax cut. They're going to be actually asked to pay more. When you start looking at the way that they're going to be paying for this, they are talking about eliminating the personal exemption, the dependent exemption. People who have large families, they're going to certainly end up paying more as a result of this proposal. You look at the elimination of state and local taxes. Now, that's wrong philosophically. We are a country of federalism. We respect the state and local governments. The same taxpayers shouldn't pay taxes on tax. on what you pay on taxes, but it also adversely affects middle-income families who take advantage of the deduction for state and local taxes. And when you start looking at what you lose on the personal exemption and dependents, even with what they're suggesting in increasing the standard deduction, middle-income families are going to end up paying more. It actually is going to cost them more money. And then we see some of the other things they're talking about doing, like dealing with the 401ks and restricting that. That directly affects middle-income families. It's going to make it more difficult for them to save for their retirement. It's going to cost them more taxes in the short term. And by the way, long term, it adds to the national debt again blowing a hole in the deficit. So their proposal from the beginning is one that will be detrimental to our economy. It will hurt American values. And then how are you going to pay for all this? We know there's going to be a direct attack on Medicare and Medicaid. They've already said that by putting targets in the budget documents for close to $1 trillion cut in Medicaid and a $500 billion cut in Medicare. So this is a proposal that will hurt middle-income families and hurt our economy.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. Well, as we've heard, Democrats believe we need tax reform. We think we should work together with our Republican colleagues to get tax reform, and we think that tax reform should help address the disparities that exist in our country and should help middle-income families. The President's tax plan, as it's been presented, we don't know what's in it because we haven't really seen the text yet, but what we think it will do is skew heavily to upper-income Americans, and it doesn't do nearly enough for middle-class families. Now, one way we can help families in the middle class is with increasing the child care tax credit. The cost of child care is, for most families, the second highest cost next to mortgages. In New Hampshire, the average cost to put an infant in full-time child care is almost $12,000 a year. So we need to be increasing the child care tax credit. We need to make it refundable. This is an opportunity to do that. Another area that I think we need to address in any tax reform package is helping with small businesses, with simplifying our taxes and with providing help to small businesses. 89% of small businesses turn to outside tax preparers to fill out their forms and file their returns. For small businesses, the compliance burden is 67% higher than it is for large businesses. It costs $18 billion annually. I was at a microbrewery in New Hampshire on Friday. They told me that their tax compliance costs last year were $15,000. Small businesses are spending 2.5 billion hours to comply with tax laws every year. So we need tax reform, but we need tax reform that's going to make a difference to the economy, that's going to allow us to grow the economy. Small businesses create about 2/3 of jobs in this country. We need to help them in any tax package. We need to help middle-class families. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Just two more quick points. Number one, I listened to my Republican colleagues. They say this is all aimed at the middle class. The untruthfulness that Senator Corker says is endemic to the president is spreading to them, because this is not a bill aimed at the middle class. You know that. The only way you might say the middle class will benefit is the dirty word that they never use, trickle down. They ultimately believe tax breaks on the rich and the biggest corporations will create jobs. No one else in America believes that anymore, and that's their fundamental problem. Second, Jean made a point. If this bill goes down, we'll do just what we did with health care. We'll sit down with our Republican colleagues and try to come up with a product that we will be happy to show in the sunlight, that will make the American people proud, and that can actually pass.
President Trump says that Corker is a lightweight and incompetent. What's his reputation here in the Senate?
His reputation is excellent. He's thoughtful. He's hardworking. He's bipartisan. He has strong beliefs. President Trump ought to stop tweeting and start leading. We have shown no leadership from this president, whether it's on tax reform, whether it's on health care, whether it's on North Korea. All he does is tweet and make the problem worse. Americans don't want that. See?
Mr. Coker said the president is debasing the country. Do you agree with that?
Look, I wish the president, instead of finding countless enemies to pick fights with, starts rolling up his sleeves and solving America's problems, plain and simple. Look, I said what I believe. This presidency thus far has been a total flop because he spends all his time fighting with so-called enemies and not solving problems.
So can I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Senator Corker.
And he knows him very well.
Senator Corker has been able to get strong bipartisan support for major legislation over his career. I'm proud of the record of our Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Sheen serves on that committee. We've been able to pass by 98-2 major legislation dealing with Russia and North Korea and Iran. We've been able to figure out how to handle the Iran agreements by bipartisan process. All that's been under Senator Corker's leadership. His reputation here is excellent as a serious legislator who knows how to work to get things done and is a principled individual.
And you know, just one other thing, President Trump always likes to point fingers at blame. One day it's Senator McConnell, one day it's Senator Corker, one day it's the Democrats. He ought to look in the mirror. The reason that he's not getting anything done here is because he spends all his time attacking people and almost none of his time actually solving problems.
Leader Schumer, you said that if this bill fails, Democrats will be, if this tax reform fails, Democrats will be raised down to the table. You guys already made the decision that track that Republicans are currently on means you will not make the bill better.
We haven't seen the bill. They haven't asked us to make it better. You don't put down a bill that focuses on the wealthy, raises taxes on the middle class, blows a hole in the deficit, and cuts Medicare and Medicaid, and then say, tinker at the edges and work with us. The way bipartisanship works is you sit down at the table and come up with a bill that both parties can support. Now, that means that some people in each party may not support it, particularly those who are more at each end. But that's not the way to compromise. The way to bipartisanship isn't a bill that's totally drawn up by Republicans. They throw it down on the desk and say, support it. That's what bipartisanship means. It never has.
When you consider how tight their margin for error is, and there are some Democrats and they talk about trying to get here, are you confident, based on what we do know, I know the details are scant at this stage, about the tax reform, that no Democrats support this?
Each Democrat is going to make up his or her mind. But I can tell you, first we had 45 of 48 Democrats sign a letter that said, don't blow a hole in the deficit, don't give tax breaks to the top 1%, and don't use reconciliation. None of that has happened. And the other three, I've talked to them. They share those beliefs. Go ahead, Jean.
Well, look, if this is such a great bill, why don't they show it to us? Why don't they show the American people what they're proposing? They're not doing that. They're giving us rhetoric that doesn't match the outline of what they've presented to the Senate. That's no way to get something done that's in the interests of the American people.
And it is amazing, the chasm between what they say the bill does, just the people talking here and the president, and what the bill actually looks like it's going to be from the outlines are just light years apart. It's appalling. It's not what you see in a democracy. Such deviation from the truth, as Senator Corker characterized. Yes, sir.
Are you worried about unity in your own party, given what happened with the DNC last week?
I think our party, certainly our caucus, has been unified on every major issue. And I think that our party is quite unified as well, particularly on our focus on economic issues, helping people, middle class, working class of every region of the country, every race, religion, creed, color, gender, sexual orientation, move up the ladder. That's what the American people want us to do, and that's what our party's focused on.
Did you have any conversations directly with the president about the importance of state-level tax deductions?
I have talked to the president about this in the past, and he acknowledged it, but then nothing happened, and that's what happens quite often. Last one from way in the back. I don't know who it is, but John McCain is a great American hero, and he has proven it in the last few months once again. I think there is just total respect for John McCain, both on the Democratic and Republican sides and throughout America. That's it. No, thank you. Who is it?
Flake. Can you guys win Arizona?